So let's talk about, I guess, the assassination a little bit itself. Well, actually, let me mention one other thing. It's pretty interesting, and it also relates to the Kennedy assassination in a kind of vague way. When Malcolm was doing his kind of tour of Africa, and he actually went to Cuba and talked to Fidel Castro and Saudi Arabia, the Attorney General at that time was Nicholas Katzenbach. He sent a memo to Hoover, and he suggested that Malcolm might be prosecuted under the Logan Act, which makes it illegal for citizens to enter into like unauthorized agreements with other countries. In other words, you can't say I represent the United States and go and sign a treaty or something, which is it's pretty silly thing to go after him for. But it is sort of interesting because obviously anybody who's familiar with the Kennedy assassination knows that Nicholas Katzenbach was LBJ's Attorney General, and he's the one who sent that famous memo to Bill Moyers 2 days after the Kennedy assassination saying the public must be convinced that Oswald is the real assassin. So it's just kind of an interesting correlation there as far as the kind of dirty tricks operatives. And in COINTELPRO, of course, was run by William Sullivan, the FBI, formerly of Division 5, the smeared left-wing organizations, all the kind of, the nastiness that's all associated with that. But anyway, so talking about the assassination, the object of COINTELPRO, of course, was to infiltrate these various organizations, which they did very well in terms of the Black Panthers. In the Fred Hampton case, William O'Neill, who was a friend of his, was an FBI informant and ended up leading the FBI or the Chicago police to kill him. And something very similar happened in the Malcolm X situation. So we know that certain people were definitely FBI informants. Marable says that there was at least 5. We don't know all their names, but several of them clearly were. Malcolm had shown up to give a speech in the Audubon Ballroom in New York. Typically, whenever Malcolm gave a speech somewhere, there would be somewhere like 2 or 3 dozen cops, because they were scared that there'd be a riot or whatever. They were just to keep the peace, because at this point many people there were all these suggestions that the Nation of Islam was going to kill Malcolm, and so it was a very dangerous situation. On this particular day, there was no police, and there was an operative named Gene Roberts. He was part of the security team for Malcolm, and he was working for the FBI. There's another guy named John Ali, who was also an FBI informant, and he actually met with one of the shooters day before the shooting. So they had set up. This was the plan. This is how it went down. So Malcolm came out to give his speech. The Audubon Ballroom is set up in this with various chairs, like individual chairs, like folding chairs, all along this building. Malcolm's on one side. The main entrance is all the way across at the other end of the hall, and then there's 2 side doors. So just as Malcolm was getting ready to speak, 2 guys got up and they had an altercation. They said, "Get your hand out of my pocket." And those 2 guys were involved. That's a deliberate thing that they did to get everybody's attention drawn to them. And then when they did that, the main shooter came out with a shotgun, shot Malcolm, ran out a side door. Then 2 other guys with pistols, 45s, came out and shot Malcolm again, but they tried to run out the back. And at the same time this was going on, there was a smoke bomb that went off in the back of the room. Okay. So the 2 guys who were trying to run out the back, one of them was caught. And his name is Talmadge Hayer, or Thomas Hagen. He was caught, and they almost beat him to death, the people there. And so he was eventually arrested. The police took forever to get there. Again, like I said, usually there was police there whenever Malcolm gave a talk. In this case, there were none. And then it apparently took them almost an hour, or Nobody, it's not really specified, but it took them a long time to get there. And so when they finally did, they had a very kind of leisurely investigation. There's descriptions of Marable says that the officers were walking around with their hands in their pockets, not very interested in the investigation. And eventually, the extraordinary thing, the shooting happened about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. They needed the building because the George Washington birthday party was taking place that same day. And so the police came out, they did their pathetic investigation, they got the body out, and then the hall was cleaned up, and by 7 p.m., the George Washington birthday party went off. I was very struck by that fact, that even the symbolism of that Malcolm X is murdered at 3 in the afternoon, and 4 hours later, people celebrating the George Washington birthday party are dancing on the spot where he was killed. That's just an extraordinary thing, and really a shameful event. It's just a horrific thing. Anyway, so Talmadge Hare is arrested, and then the police went out and they arrested 2 other guys because they knew that there were 3 shooters. So during the trial of Talmadge Hare and these 2 other guys, everybody was aware that Hare had been one of the handgun shooters, and everybody was aware that he was one of the shooters, and he eventually during the trial just confessed. He said, "Okay, yeah, I was there, I did it." However, these 2 other guys, I have no idea who they are. Muhammad Abdul Aziz and Khalil Islam. He said these guys are, I have no idea. And the trial just kept going. It just kept going. They were found guilty, and they were given the same exact sentence as Hare. So one of the known shooters and 2 guys who had nothing to do with the murder were put into prison for the murder of Malcolm X. And Hare later, much later, named all of the other people who were involved. And one of them is William Bradley. And Bradley was the guy who was the shooter. He was the one with the shotgun. He's the one who actually killed Malcolm X, because that first shot killed him. The other shots, he was already dead when those shots hit him. And there's many interesting things, I guess, about Bradley, but one of the things that he points out, that Marable points out, is that in 1968, there was a bank in New Jersey that was robbed by 3 guys. And about a year later, it was revealed that Bradley was one of the guys who robbed the bank, and there was a second man that was also arrested. However, Bradley got a different attorney. He got his own attorney, separate from the other guy, and ultimately the charges against him were dismissed, and then Moore was convicted. These 2 guys were involved in the same crime. And Marable says, Bradley's special treatment by the criminal justice system in 1969 to 1970 raises the question of whether he was an FBI informant, either after the assassination of Malcolm X or very possibly even before. It would explain why Bradley took a different exit from the murder scene. Bradley goes out the side door. The other 2 guys tried to run out the back, which shielded him from the crowd's retaliation. It suggests that Bradley and possibly other Newark Mosque members may have actively collaborated on the shooting with local law enforcement and the FBI. And it's great that Marable puts this in, because it's obvious, that's an obvious point. But I think it's very helpful to us, because this is coming from somebody who is probably the most respected scholar in his field, and he's saying, look, it's pretty obvious that the police and the FBI are involved in this thing. And like I say, we know that there was at least 5 informants, FBI informants at the scene. He also mentioned something very interesting. He talks about how, and of course, this again is familiar to anybody who studied the Kennedy assassination, but the major media immediately began a propaganda campaign in support of the state-sponsored version of the event. So he quotes the New York Times and Time Magazine. New York Times says that Malcolm used his true gifts to evil purpose. That he's a crazy fanatic. It was an easy story to perpetrate, and in a large, I think it's been very successful since then. I think there are large parts of white America that still think of Malcolm X as just a crazy radical who sort of got what was coming to him, instead of someone who came to a realization that there is evil in the world, but it's not dictated necessarily by race, but by our actions, and that the United States is, as Martin Luther King said, one of the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. So anyway, I think it's an extraordinary story, and it's also a great story. It's a great story in terms of its humanity, right? Malcolm X starts at this point and ends up at this incredible place where he's this, a guy who was a petty thief who goes to prison and then ends up being this internationalist spokesperson for peace, and then is gunned down by the state. But it's not obviously a great American story. It's not the kind of story that Americans are comfortable with promoting. He was not interested in material goods. He was not a great businessman. He didn't build an empire. He didn't. These things were of no interest to Malcolm. What he was interested in was the truth, and was spreading the truth as he knew it. And that's the other great thing about the story of Malcolm X, which has affected me profoundly since I first read it when I was about 18 years old. It was a transformative experience in my life. It really, I think in a lot of ways, it ended up spurring me to do a lot of the research that I've done, I guess in the same way that the Kennedy assassination did for others. But this was a man who very publicly took he made these statements, and then he eventually had to repudiate them publicly, which I think is amazing. It's a story about a guy who changed his mind, which is, again, not another story that you hear very often. That you've got somebody who's essentially an ideologue in one direction and then realizes that he's wrong, and he has to very publicly say, you know what, I made a mistake, and this is what I actually believe now because I have better information. It's really, really astonishing, and it's also it's a terrible story from the point of view of the state, because it's yet another example of the state executing someone who is uncongenial to its goals. When the state is threatened, it lashes out.